Welcome to the Customer Retention Show. I'm your host, Tom Burrell. In this podcast, we dive deep into the drivers of retention in different industry verticals. Welcome to episode 3 of the Customer Retention Show. In each episode of this podcast, we dive deep into the drivers of retention in a specific industry vertical, and this episode is no different. We have got 3 brilliant experts from the world of betting and gaming. First up, I'd love the guests to introduce themselves. Kat, can we start with you?
Hi, my name's Kat Arnsby. I am currently working as head of CRM for Press Centre Group. I'm based in Malta. I've been working with gamblers actually for unbelievably almost 25 years, so very comfortable with a full range of gambling profiles. And later in my career now, I'm getting sort of more interested in agentic tech plugging into MarTech stacks and making my life way exciting.
Amazing to have you on, Kat. Simon, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'm Simon. So I haven't quite got 25 years. I've got about 13 or 14 in the industry, across a wide number of roles through performance marketing, so acquisition and retention. Both figure strongly in my CV. I've got a blend of operational experience, but also quite a bit of tech. And like Kat, agentic AI is the theme of the week, eh?
Perfect. And Matt, do you want to go?
Yeah, so compared to the two people on stage here, I'm probably the least experienced. I've been in the industry 11 years, working in similar retention roles across Sky Betting and Gaming for 7 or 8, and most recently at Evoke, running CRM for 888 and William Hill.
Amazing. Right, perfect. Great to have you on as well, Matt. So let's dive into it then. So we're going to cover off drivers of retention throughout the life cycle. So logically, retention starts with acquisition. You acquire a lot of low-value, bonus-hungry customers, then LTV won't be very good. So, starting with you, Kat, how do you manage acquisition for retention to drive growth and while also seeking to acquire high-value customers?
So, just making sure that you're aware of each other's strategies, I think, is probably the key thing between acquisition and retention. We are basically two arms of the same department, right? So, if the acquisition strategy is drag in loads of low value customers, but the CRM strategy is respond with high value onboarding, then you've got a conflict and it's going to be a big problem. So making sure your strategies are aligned, you know where your players are coming from, is your best starting point for the beginning of that onboarding journey with retention, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, it's so common as well, right? I see lots of different sectors. There isn't that connection between acquisition and retention quite often, right? What's your take, Simon?
Firstly, just to agree with Kat, the relationship between the two departments is critical, and making sure that you are aligning your onboarding journeys with what the acquisition team are doing is very important, I think. And you need to engineer some of that in, because quite often, across a lot of gambling providers, you'll see the onboarding journeys are sort of fundamentally broken. And so decent offer signposting, making customers clear about how they avail themselves of the offers with the terms and conditions at the right time, even interstitials that if they place their first sports bet and actually the odds aren't where they need to be for the offer, signposting that'll be a big driver of a positive onboarding experience, and it'll drive down contact volume and will help guide the acquisition value. So making sure you've engineered that in and aligned with the acquisition team strategy, I think, is really important. I think the other bit, just referencing the fact that we're such a regulated industry nowadays, is you need to make sure you're building the rest of the stuff from a regulatory point of view. There will be a lot of interventions nowadays to make sure players are safe, and some of those will break the journey, right? So making sure the signposting of that part is clear for the customers as well, and you're educating them about the player control player control tools and managing any of those compliance risks that you might have effectively is another way of driving value.
Interesting, like you say, that so many onboarding journeys are broken. Like how do they break?
So I'm talking about here. So if you let's give a silly example, right? A bet 10 get 20 offer, which is fairly typical and standardized across the industry. Those offers always have restrictions against them, standard. Typically, for example, if you get a free bet, but you have to place the bet at odds greater than 2-1 or some variant of that odds window. Customers cannot realize that, place any old bet, and then they don't know where they've got their acquisition offer. So making sure in the engineering of that journey, the signposting around that bet placement and first activity works and is super, super clear so that customers know where they are, is one example of where journeys get broken. So you'll find people having made their first sports bet, they put it on the wrong odds, they don't get the offer, and immediately it's a crappy journey for them. They'll either balk and walk away going, I've been conned, or they'll try and call a call center, and again, you're in a sticky space. So that's just one example.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, it's because it's so important, right? We'll get onto onboarding in a second, but get that moment wrong, you can lose them forever, right? And all that money that you spent on acquisition is just wasted.
Yeah.
What's your take on this, Matt?
Yeah, I think I agree with the guys. I think the most important thing to get good LTV from combining sort of CRM and retention with acquisition is having that constant feedback loop, making sure we know that if someone's coming through on a certain offer, certain channel, these are the ones that are becoming valuable, these are the ones that aren't, and making sure we're set up in a way to sort of amplify where they've came in. If a customer's came through the Racing Post, that's a very different customer to one that came through football websites, and we need to make sure our journeys are tailored for that. And I think we also need to sort of know when to cut our losses, particularly from an LTV point of view. We're going to acquire 10, 15, 20,000 very poor quality customers every time YouTubers decide to have a fight, because we'll get poor quality acquisition that want to put a couple of pounds on a single fight and have got no interest in general sports or betting. Similar with the Grand National, we need to be aligned that we're going to get low value customers. It's finding the sort of needles in a haystack and working with the acquisition team to help us find those needles at that time is absolutely key.
Yeah, absolutely. And like those moments are really interesting, aren't they? Those big seasonal moments, or those big sporting events, and like the quality of customer you acquire, because it can be a really big acquisition moment, but they're not all the best customers necessarily. So we've talked a little bit about onboarding already, but it's quite often the most overlooked life stage in many sectors, particularly for subscription brands. It can be the most important, right? Because if you have a good onboarding experience, then you're more likely to use the product on an ongoing basis and be retained. And I think betting and gaming in some respects is quite similar to subscription in that there's a recurring revenue relationship, even if it's not necessarily committed. Do you want to talk a little bit more about your experience of that, Matt, and what works and how you get customers to become active players post that early life period or during that early life period?
Yeah, of course. So I think Simon touched upon it in the first one, but sort of onboarding period and finding out the right odds to bet 10 get 20 is a really good example of a customer that isn't going to know its minimum of evens. And we've got a pot of customers that are joining us every week, some of which have been active on 3 or 4 of our competitors. Average is sort of between 3 and 4 accounts for the UK market, some of which will never have bet online before, ever, in any sense. So we've got to do different educational purposes based on sort of what they've came in on, what experience they've got in terms of online betting and gaming. So it's key that we get those sort of educational pieces right in the early days. This is how you bet with us. This is what's different about William Hill. This is the benefit you get with it, etc. From a brand perspective. And again, it's around sort of personalising that journey to sort of make sure that these 4 or 5 key steps that we know every customer that's going to be a good customer needs to do, whether that's deposit, play, multi-product play, download the app, etc. And gamifying that onboarding experience is absolutely vital for us to essentially give ourselves the best chance of retention in a market where there's a lot of samplers around in terms of customers that try a bet. And sometimes it's as simple as the first bet won, the first bet lost. I'm lucky with Sky Bet and I'm unlucky with Ladbrokes, for example. We know that's a mindset we've got to try and conquer.
Yeah. You've got a take on this as well, Kat, right? In terms of like product versus
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my sort of my main learning background is the product marketing environment. So for me, onboarding is mostly, I'd say in most industries, a product experience, but I think it's definitely relevant in gaming because in terms of the content that we're issuing to the customers, there's a lot of us selling the same games, the same product essentially. So the features that you have control of, that product journey in the onboarding stage, I think that's where you can really snap up that lifetime loyalty. So if you have got the wrong product for the wrong profile, there isn't anything that retention marketing can do to help that. So for me, a key part is making sure you're not building any product areas that you can't report on. And certainly your marketing team, retention or acquisition, are not pushing customers to areas that exist that we can't report on. Because we talked in the beginning about a nice tight loop, right, between acquisition and retention. And that product feedback loop is critical. Take the data from the customers when they come from a high value acquisition point. Where are they going? What are they doing? What's the product journey that seems to be the most enjoyable for them? Because that's how I tailor my retention marketing in the future to make sure that the lookalike customers who are coming in are following that product journey.
Yeah. Send them on the right path based on what they're
Correct.
interested in. Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. All right, let's move on then from this slightly. So, like Simon, and particularly in the UK market, right? There's a huge amount of aggression around like bonusing and offers to acquire new customers. Like, how do you kind of get around that race to the bottom?
Yeah, so look, ultimately it's about, as ever, it's about return on ad spend at the top level, by which I mean understanding your acquisition funnel from the perspective of how much it's costing you to acquire, which isn't just bonus cost, it's also the marketing spend that you're doing to do it, and then looking at the relationship between that cost to acquire and what you think the payback will be. So there's lots of clever modeling you can do on the payback periods that you're getting for particular customers, or you can actually do it relatively simply just by looking at ratios of the payback versus the first month. So the level of bonus really is just a function of that equation, and bonusing quite a lot can be okay as long as you're acquiring the right customers and making sure you take them through that value funnel. I think the other thing about that is getting extremely careful about watching the player journeys as they come to pay back. What is that ad spend? The issue here is that you spend all the money up front and you're waiting for the customer to come and pay back. So, over the last few years, especially in the UK, as more and more regulation and more checks has come in, which is the right thing to do, what that presents for most customers is a series of drop-off points. As they reach certain play thresholds, you're having to get sure and sure that the customer's okay and playing within their means and can afford it and they're gambling safely. So managing that part of the journey when you've got these horrible, delta curves that Matt's referenced in terms of quite a lot of low value customers, but some relatively high value customers, will be a huge influence on what the ultimate return on ad spend is. So it's not simply a case of saying bonus race to the bottom. It's about the balance between ad spend, and it's about the balance between how you manage the customer value through the early life cycle to make sure you're getting the payback and working to a payback that you're happy with.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. What's your take, Kat?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to sort of lean a bit more into the product. I think everything Simon said is spot on, no arguments. But I'm a gambler myself, right? So I don't just work in the industry, I punt in the industry on my weekends and evenings. And for me, it's really critical to make the customers tell us who they are. And sometimes tech blocks us, right? So if we can offer a range of bonus types, what the customer chooses is actionable information. They've given us a data point that we can start to use. Also important to make sure you are dealing with your strategic priority segments. So there's been a long legacy in the gambling industry of just really looking at value profiling. And it's a very suspicious metric on the short term, right? It can be very, very tricky to understand. So I think what we're seeing now growing up in the gambling industry is the recency, frequency, monetary segmentation. And the smart guys are overlaying a Z score to give a true risk profile based on lifetime value. And that's how we can start to make these choices. So not only dealing with the database that we have, but preemptively treating customers in a different way and getting them into the right life cycle more quickly. Because it's not all about high value players, right? The money in the future in gambling is going to be about servicing high value players well and looking after the wider part of your database. And modern MarTech gives us the facility to use automation to treat the entire part of the database that's strategically relevant the same way we have in the past treated VIPs. So that to me is really important. Give them the choice and make sure you're offering the right people the right set of choices.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I guess also that thing about kind of giving the choice and identifying themselves early on is really important, because when they first joined, you don't know what they're interested in, right? So it gives you that kind of quick metric to send them on the right path. Yeah. But what's your take, Matt?
Yeah, I think similar to what the guys have said, I think there's a lot we can do, particularly the VIP stuff that Kat mentioned. Obviously, the VIP element is moving away from the UK market, but the making sure that the bulk of the revenue is going to come from that sort of medium value, core value base, and getting the most out of those customers while staying within the right bonus elements and bonus means. I think we've seen it here. I've seen it everywhere I've worked, actually, where there'll be customers that we over reward in the early days purely due to an over aggressive race to the bottom marketing strategy. So within 3 or 4 months of a customer's life cycle, we've now flagged a customer as potentially a bonus abuser, when all they've really done is took what was offered to them, which was too much, and it was a misstep from a model sort of that said they've got too much. One thing we noticed, particularly when Sky and Paddy Power sort of joined together when I was at Flutter at my end of my time there, is we've got customers at Sky that we say, he's a bonus abuser. And Paddy said, he's a great customer, make him perfect. And it's the same guy. We know it's the same person. It's just the way that they were treated in their early life is different. So now there's a different outcome of what that customer is. So putting them into the sort of bonus abuse bucket or the good customer bucket can completely depend on what we're offering them in those, particularly the early life stage. And as Simon said, whether we're paying back our marketing spend, we might write a customer off because we've been too aggressive in terms of value of bonus to try and get that marketing spend to pay back quicker.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that, like the kind of the stat around kind of customers having multiple apps and there's not much actually new growth left in the market, except for those maybe some casual bettors turning 18 and betting for the first time. So yeah, really important, right? And understanding that your low value customers might actually be high somewhere else is a really interesting strategy to think about. Like staying on bonusing, obviously lots of challenges in acquisition around getting it right. but also in retention. What's your take on that, Kat? Like, how have you seen bonusing and retention work well? And what advice would you give to marketers in the industry to make it work better?
So I have seen it work really well when the bonus that's offered really ties up with the customer's motivation for being on the gambling site in the first place. So as mentioned, I'm a gambler, and any of the operators I play with can put bonus in front of me. I'm going to take it, probably, right? Even if I haven't responded to email marketing, it's just there when I'm on site. I'll take it. Doesn't really mean I like it or I want it. It's just some free stuff that's there. But where bonus is tailored against the customer's gaming profile, and we understand more about them than their value, suddenly we can get really powerful with the right bonus. It can be really de-incentivizing to actively target customers with the incorrect bonus type. So if we look at a guy who perhaps just plays a couple of spins when he's waiting for an appointment versus a guy who wants to do 3,000 or 4,000 spins on a 2-hour session, 3-hour session on a Friday night, just from the deposit and value profile, they may look quite similar, right? They could have deposited the same amount and initially took one of the same limited offers we had when they joined. But actually, gaming behavior wise, they're extremely different profiles. And if we use that to build a picture of them, then suddenly we can be sure we're sending them the right bonus. And that will, over time, make them like our brand better than the brand that's sending them the wrong bonus, because they don't know who they are. They're just going, we'll give you a bonus based on your last deposit value. Whereas if I'm giving a bonus based on who that person is, in the long term, of course, I'm going to beat the competitors out with that understanding. So it's all about profiling, again, beyond that very simple value profiling that we all use now. And of course, Tom, don't forget your bonus exclusion strategy, right? Like, one of the main arguments that senior CRM people have is bonus spend on a short term, right? And actually, rather than saying, oh, well, let's just reduce the segment size, or we'll knock the bottom value 500 customers off. If you start to segment your bonus approach at the profile level, it becomes real clear, real quick who should be excluded. And they may not be bonus abusers or winning players. They are just not relevant for this particular campaign set. You can do something else for them later. So yeah, make sure you know who you're sending and make sure you know who you're excluding.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I just want to bring Matt in on that. Actually, you were nodding vigorously there, Matt. And I just want one of the things I think you've worked on is like understanding when a customer's got a predisposition to play anyway versus when you need to incentivize them to play. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more? It's kind of building on what Kat was saying.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of what I think successful CRM does, it's staying out of the way of the customer quite often, as well as changing customer behavior. If a customer's coming on, playing safely, playing regularly, a relevant level of spend that they're quite happy with, we should be letting them do that, continuing to sort of play in the way they want to play, rewarding them at the levels they want to be rewarded. I think Kat made a really interesting point around the sort of types of bonus. And I think I've seen a couple of people in this industry do it really well, where they've said, complete these things and you'll get a £5 bonus, but you decide if that £5 is a free bet to spend on the football, a free bet for racing, or 50 free spins. Is a really good, powerful mechanic of tell us how you want your bonus to be given. And then not only is that data used then, if this customer lapses at a further point down the line, we know that 50 free spins will get cat back because that's what she likes, rather than a £5 free football bet. It's the same cost to us, but we know we can target her with the right message. And I think that's absolutely vital in terms of a reactivation plan, but using the customers sort of while we've got them on site to give us that indicator of what the best thing is for them. I've also seen a couple of examples recently of non-bonus related bonus spend, essentially. So people giving tickets and scarves and football shirts if they've got ties up to sponsorship. I know we've got a deal with the Scottish Premier League. Sky Bet have got one with the Football League. Betway have got West Ham. I think the majority of bookmakers somewhere have got sponsorship deals. Utilising that inventory to give to customers as something a little bit more tangible than a £5 free bet is working really well.
Perfect. What's your take, Simon? I know you got some thoughts on AI here as well.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we all have.
Yeah.
I think building exactly on what Kat and Matt have said, all right, there is, if you looked at the industry 10 years ago, it was just bonuses everywhere, right? And then that was as the market was going through its growth phase. Now everyone's got a bit more circumspect about those bonuses, and they tend to apply still, they'll apply frameworks of certain ratios of bonus spend to turnover or deposits, or however the particular industry does it. And that's a great control mechanic at managing your overall bonus cost. But I think what Matt and Kat have said is exactly right. It won't find you your optimum bonus, in the sense of you'll still be over bonusing people that frankly don't need interrupting, as Matt said, or you might not be giving enough bonus because you're capped at that level, even though there's a sensible payback period. And I think AI here has the role to help do that. I mean, you can't beat the customer telling you. I think, and again, I'd agree what Matt said in terms of mechanical choose your bonus. No better way than satisfying a customer and giving them what they explicitly ask for. But in those mechanics where that doesn't work, to explore what does incite and grow the lifetime value of your customers. And therefore AI, which will do a good job of exploring all of the space, irrespective of what you might think they are, to grow that life cycle is really important. So, historically you might go, well, he's a sports player who's played on football, so I'm going to give him a football bonus. Might not be relevant for him. He might always have his football bet lined up, but 50 free spins would be a more relevant approach. And you might not necessarily have the data for that, but the AI will help explore that space efficiently and constantly move things around in terms of the context of the customer. So it's early days for that kind of stuff. Some of the CRM providers have those tools built in. Others can acquire from, there's loads of these vendors out in the market that provide that stuff. But I think over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, we'll start to explore some of that. But it's got its challenges. I think we're going to come to that later.
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk more about AI in a bit. But there's something as well that I think Kat's talked about as well, and I've talked about before as well, is like customers seeing themselves as a particular type of better, whereas the data shows something else. For example, I'm a sports bettor. Actually, we're giving them free spins offers because they're spending more money on slots. Yeah, do you want to talk about that, Kat?
Yeah, I mean, I spent about 5 years sort of solely dealing with network games players, and that included poker players. And if you had asked any of the tens of thousands of players in the database, are you a casino gambler or a poker player? They would have said, I'm a poker player. How very dare you, madam? I play poker. I'm a skill game player. But then actually, if you were to trace their deposits, I mean, there's a clear break line. Obviously, your highest value poker players are poker players. But there is the rest of the database, about 80%, driving about 50% of revenue, and more than half their deposits are going on slots or sports betting. So, but that's the customer psychology. It's their motivation for gambling is that it's their gamble. Poker is a skill game. So if you insult them with a casino bonus, you may lose them. If you give them a free poker ticket, you will make that back very quickly through slots. You've given them an excuse to play poker by giving them a poker ticket, and their deposit will go on your slots.
Yeah, and that kind of plays into what Simon was saying about AI as well, right? Like the AI can have a role to play in kind of understanding these kind of intrinsic customer motivations.
Before I worked here, I worked in financial services for Visa, actually. And we had this concept called Visa offers, which would profile people's spend on Visa cards and then give them relevant offers for the merchants or the merchant types that they used. And before we launched that, we did some market research about, which supermarket do you use and da-da-da. And of course, what people say when you ask them what supermarket they shop at, they tend to say something aspirational like Waitrose or Marks and Spencer's. The reality of their bloody statement is, no, you don't. You shop at Lidl. So then you've got the hard decision of going, right, do I send you a Waitrose voucher, which actually you won't really value because you don't spend there, but it might give you the reason to go there? Or do I actually send you what you do spend at, which is Lidl? That's a difficult play on value perception versus actual utility value to that customer. And that's a really interesting game to play with. And it's just exactly what Kat said about the spins in the poker example.
Yeah, we've got sort of similar with where we are now with the sports and a casino example, where we know that our sports base or customers that would classify themselves as sports, the majority of them that are playing both spend more on casino than they spend on sports. But that first interaction, the reason to log in and the reason to play with the brand is sports. So we need to make sure our outbound CRM journey is coming back on the Liverpool game, coming back on Cheltenham, coming back on the cricket. Whereas our follow-up on-site needs to be, you've came here for what you want, you're a sports bettor, while you're here, here's 5 free spins. And then to Kat's point, that's when the gaming wallet and the gaming deposits come through, probably stronger than they did, but they need to be treated like they're a sports customer. So we'll tell you you're a sports customer.
Treat them like a sports customer or a poker customer, because that's what they associate their identity around gaming with. Incentivize them to do the behavior that is most valuable. Yeah. So look, there's obviously a very important aspect of gaming that is protecting the customer from harm. Like, how do you balance that kind of desire to provide valuable interactions that support customer attraction, support retention, support the overall customer experience, and drive value for the business and drive value for your customers, with the balance to avoid problem gambling, avoid incentivizing harm? I don't know if you want to take that one first, Matt.
Yeah, I think if it's done in the right way with a view to sort of medium and long term value, there's no reason the two can't coexist. beneficially to each other. For example, if we've got a customer that set a deposit, as we encourage all of our customers to do, and they can say that they can play £50 a month, let's say, there's no way we should be emailing them with a deposit 50, get free spins offer at the start of a month. We should be making sure that weekly we're giving them a sort of stake 10, because that's the levels they should be playing at a weekly basis, to not burn and churn through their whole allowance or whole deposit limit at the start. We know that leads to, firstly, problem gambling if they're playing that, and if they start to chase losses in that area, which would then mean we put sort of restrictions in place and journeys in place to stop them playing. But we should also be educating a customer that said, play in small doses, spend a tenner here, tenner there, throughout a longer period of time, so we can get the long-term retention, we can get value from the customer without improving their risk or without increasing their sort of potential problem gambling statement, and without them hitting deposit limits that they've set themselves that they don't want to be going over.
Yeah. What's your take, Kat?
I mean, again, I would say my take's pretty much the same as Matt's there, but in terms of sort of digging these players out of your database, I think it's about customer motivation, or in this case, the opposite side, customer demotivating factors, and they will be data traceable. So if you know your customers well enough, right, you know your profiles, if your profiles are well defined, it can take a reasonably long time for a customer to move between a well-defined recency, frequency, monetary segment, and especially when it's overlaid with gaming behavior. A settled customer, again, if he's had the same behavior for 2 years, a high-speed change is a demonstration exactly of this kind of psychological demotivator. A customer who has a gambling problem that's developing is going to be an unhappy person, and it will reflect in the data. So if you know your profiles, know the mean of your profiles, then any customers who quickly move outside the sort of parameters of what's accepted as normalized within that profile, that is a really quick identifier that can either trigger automatic blocks, warnings at the back that we can respond on or not respond on depending on assessment. So there's really no excuse in 2025 for not having eyes on your customer. And a little bit that's important is probably make sure you sell it internally. So it's really easy to get into meetings with commercial stakeholders. They may now at this stage come from outside the industry, and they just see a value opportunity, and they don't actually understand that looking after your customers from a responsible gambling point of view is commercial state sustainability strategy, right? If we burn them all today, we've got no gamblers for tomorrow. So making sure you internally sell that as a marketer and make your commercial team understand it's not a fluffy thing, responsible gambling. It is a really important pillar of the commercial strategy for a long term.
Yeah, no, absolutely, that makes sense. And like kind of making sure that those journeys are integrated as well, so they haven't though self-excluded and they get a marketing email to bet now. And so, Simon, what's your take on the organisational side of it?
Oh, I mean, I think you've just alluded to the perfect example there, Tom. Right, the fundamental job of a marketeer is to retain customers and grow up. All right, that's their role in organisation. But we're highly regulated now for good reason, and we need to take care. So one of my observations is it's unfair to ask a marketeer to do their job whilst at the same time having to apply player protection. And you'll get either people who are not expert or they're over responsible or whatever. So organisationally having a separation of concerns, which says, I've got a compliance and a player protection team that are going to look after the player's health, and they're going to give you a safe pool of players that you can talk to in whatever context you think is appropriate. We'll provide you a sensible regulatory framework where everyone can operate with safety and with confidence. But having those two teams work together is really, really important. So as the compliance team building more and more safety measures and more things that Kat alluded to about how, you'll trigger particular warnings and alerts that might suppress it, just keeping that regular conversation between two sets of people will build a healthy environment where you can grow safely, not at the expense of burning out customers. But it's really important that you don't ask people to, in effect, mark their own homework from a compliance perspective. Have that separation, have that protection framework.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Staying with you, Simon. So where have you seen, what are the kind of tips and tactics to get that balance right in sports betting?
Yeah, I mean, one of the risks with CRM is you see it simply as a way of sending out a high volume of branded communications to customers just to drive your reach and doing all of the sort of lifecycle bonus management you've talked about here, and that's your only job. I think it's helpful if you sort of reframe that problem in the sense of just analysing why we're here as a business, what's our customer value proposition. And if you take sports betting, the customer value proposition really is that we should be additive to the sports experience, all right? We should add a bit more fizz when you're watching the game. And if you take that lens on your marketing and think, right, if I'm going to issue a communication, how is it additive to the betting experience, that'll allow you to drive customer engagement. So if take an example of horse racing, all right, you see somebody bet on the first race at Doncaster. It's quite a strong indication that they're probably at Doncaster. So what should your communication be at that moment, when that bet's settled and they've potentially won? Well, if you can get a message out for the next race that that had a really nice slick customer journey to a bet that they may want to place on a horse of a similar odds, and you introduce into that communication a little bit of data and stats about form, or the last time this horse won on the flat or whatever, and you can automate that process, all of a sudden it doesn't become marketing. It actually just becomes a nice customer journey, especially for the recreational guys. They will get what is a very slick journey to get to their next piece of entertainment. So my advice on stuff like that is just reframe the problem and think, how does what I am saying add to the enjoyment of what they're doing, which is watching sport? And then you're probably on a good track.
Yeah, makes sense. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I'd agree with Simon. I think we're an entertainment product, particularly sports betting is an entertainment product. And I think CRM as a channel should be adding to that entertainment, not going to be the ones to let you know that Liverpool are playing Man United. If you're a Liverpool fan, if you're a Man United fan, they're playing each other. That's not news coming from us. So we need our communication to be, why should you be interested in betting on it, and why should you be interested in betting on it with us? Whether we can tie in sort of previous ones. So last time they played each other, you bet on Fernandes to score and he scored a penalty and won 30 quid. Or last time these teams have played, Liverpool have won 4 of the last 5. Here's a sort of adding stats from people like Opta from 23 from sort of that can add context to the game outside of just it's Liverpool Man United, which you'd already know about. Similar to racing, we sort of have quite a good racing product and a lot of recreational racing punters, where Simon's used one great example of someone's betting on the first or second race at Donny. They're probably at Donny races, so we need to make sure that our tailoring for the rest of the day is about the races of where they are. If they've bet on a horse that's raced 5 weeks ago that's won, let them know that it's running again and it's at these odds and at this place where you can back it, adding value to the initial bet that they've done, but also to the sport that they potentially are or aren't going to watch is absolutely key in the sports world.
Absolutely. So same question in gaming, like what are the tips and tactics that drive engagement in retention in casino and poker and getting that balance with safer gambling? What's your hot tips for that?
So if I start with casino, I think I've already sort of touched on it a little bit. It is absolutely to have these personalised bonuses, right? Give something new, interesting, customer hasn't seen before. It is optimal, not always possible, but really watch the options you're giving your customer, because that's what other indirect competitor industries are doing. I mean, I read somewhere something like Netflix has something like 16,000 data points per 30 seconds that you scroll the site, right? So they know what I want, they know what I want before I want it. And we are quite a long way behind as an industry in terms of that choice. Blanket bonusing, time-specific campaigns, site-wide offers, it's all starting to feel a bit legacy. And we just need to get on top of that choice, that personalisation, not just at the high cat level, but at the actual product level for the customers. The next generation of gamblers is what scares me. So our most profitable customers now are elder millennials and Gen Xers who are at their income earning peak. And the younger millennials and the Gen Z coming through, they had a much more interesting childhood than us, right? Their games were better. They have really cool computer games. They have crypto culture, loot box culture, things that are really, really amendable. Some of the new games, they can change the odds themselves, the prizes themselves. So we need to up our game in the product and UX area as well. Otherwise, once the elder millennials like myself start to retire and have to save money, maybe in a hot spot there. So with poker, I think it's a weird beast, right? Some operators have given up on it completely because of the network liquidity dependencies. So I don't know. If you want to keep poker, it needs to be part of your wider acquisition strategy, is probably what I'm saying. So the time of poker being viewed as it's an independent product in its own right, other than maybe for the absolute leading poker operators, Stars and GG Poker, probably poker needs to be seen as an acquisition product, pulling in the kind of gamblers who have multi-product behavior for a fairly low CPA.
Yes, makes sense. What's your thoughts on that, Simon, on gaming tips and tricks and tactics to drive attention?
Yeah, I mean, again, what Kat said about blanket campaigns with blanket creative at a blanket time is definitely old hat, and it's a bit easier to control in gaming where it's not quite so events driven, but nevertheless it poses its own challenges. So thinking about how you can get the messaging right for the customer, i.e. who they are and what you can derive about what they like. So your gaming creative that sends out should de facto have a game recommendation for them, which should be absolutely relevant to their recent gameplay. Let's use those two letters AI again. All right, that machine learning algorithm, there's loads of tools out there now, and I see that almost as a mandatory of any gaming communication. You're talking specifically about what the customer says. But you also need to think about the timing of it, all right, which is a stickier problem, both in terms of the context of the customer, i.e., don't send them a bonus, £10 deposit match offer if they've got $50 in their wallet, and that $50 in their wallet changes in real time. So you need to have all of that integrated. But you also need to think about the time of send. Friday is fine for 70% of the people, and I've had conversations with some of my Tel Aviv colleagues before about why 11 o'clock on a Friday is a good time to send, because they thought that was mad. I said, no, it's when people are bored on the bus on the way home from the pub, or it's closing out time. That's not true of everybody. So working out a campaign mechanic through the course of your weekly cycles that is actually doing the right time for the individual is another of those challenges to avoid that blanketness. And I'll be honest, I haven't seen anybody do it right. It's quite hard. And the answer will be those two letters again, AI somehow. But it's, again, we're going to come to those challenges later about what that means. You've just got to get more and more specific about the time and the context and the creative treatment that you're giving those customers in that moment.
Yeah, what's your take on this, Matt? Where do you see the biggest opportunities?
Yeah, I think I completely agree, Sam. The biggest opportunity is being able to say, Simon's going to play at 6 o'clock and we need to give him the right offer at 5:55. Matt's going to play at 11 o'clock. We need to give him the right offer at 10:55. And it's being able to correctly predict when those times are going to be and make sure we've got the right bonus. To Kat's point earlier, we've got the right level of bonus, the right type of bonus, the right mechanic, and getting to them at that right time. We've done testing with sort of real-time defectors, and if we expect you to turn up by 5 o'clock and it's 5:05, do we do something? But I'm probably with Simon here. I don't think anyone's quite got it right, but I think that's an AI opportunity. And just to touch on the other point that Kat mentioned around sort of, I've got the same fears around the next generation. The biggest competitors for me as William Hill and Vote isn't just Sky Bet, Bet365, Paddy Power. It's Xbox, PlayStation, Netflix, and the other sort of time features where they're a little bit more advanced in the technology of interactivity. And I think whichever company cracks that first is probably going to be still a big market share gain in the next generation.
Yeah, makes sense. So we've talked quite a lot about AI, and we are in the midst at the start of like huge disruption. I think there's a lot out there about how our world will change in the next 5 years, and I think no industry is immune to that, whether that's gambling or whether that's retention or any sector actually. There's so much change that's about to happen, right? And you've mentioned it quite a few times, Simon, AI and how AI is transforming and will transform this industry. So I just wanted to start off with you on that. Like, how do you see AI, particularly agentic AI, changing the way in which retention marketing is delivered, and what do you think the impacts will be on the industry and on the customer?
I mean, I think we've sort of covered, I think, some of the opportunities as we've talked about how AI can inform your campaign targeting, your sequencing, your bonus allocation strategy, all of which can be useful and will be useful, and the operators who get it right will fly with it. It's very similar to the revolution that went on about 5 years ago when GDPR became an issue and sharing personalised data with Facebook and Google became a no-no, and all of a sudden Facebook basically said, all right, you're not going to tell us who to customer. You're going to send us 10 creatives and we're going to tell you where to customer. That was very disruptive in the acquisition space for a bit, but the operators who got it right and adopted that early ran away with the market share in terms of what Facebook were doing, and it transferred Meta's bottom line as well. That is doubtless going to happen, that transition where you are doing constrained, unsupervised campaigning will happen in the next 2 or 3 years. But it's not without its challenges. Especially in the gaming industry. I think there's a few things you need to bear in mind when you're going to adapt that. The first is, again, this theme of player protection. You've got to be careful that when you set off your AI campaigning, that all of a sudden your campaign mechanics or metrics don't start doing churn and burn by stealth. All right, it thinks it's growing the player value, and all of a sudden you realise you've got a small pool of customers that you can't really defend the bonus strategies around that. So you've got to make sure that whatever you're setting up retains at its core a degree of player protection. And The second thing on AI is that actually gaming is quite hard because agentic AI tends to chase a utility function, i.e. a thing that it's got to maximize, which in this industry is obviously future player value. That can be quite challenging when your most valuable player might become your least valuable player on the course of one bet. So understanding what you want your agentic AI to chase as its utility function is a challenge in its industry. Another thing that springs to mind is the sort of perceived loss of control. We are used to operating to quite specific metrics over large cohorts, and it's very, very prescriptive in the past. This unsupervised agent allocating bonuses without us knowing exactly who it's going to and where gives organisations understandably a bit of the heebie-jeebies. So we'll have to work through that perceived loss of control. And then the last thing is that there's no point in having an agentic AI with sophisticated campaign metrics if the creative's always the same. And I've sort of talked a little bit about that earlier in terms of games recommendations or sports bet recommendations or all that kind of thing. You have to have a creative capability that is able to flex to the moves in the market because, again, we don't sell suitcase widgets. All right, we sell events that might only exist for the next 30 minutes. And so that interface to the way you automate your creative, getting the live odds, getting the live markets in place is just, another barrier, I suspect, to adoption of the AI stuff. But I think it's one of those areas where you've got no choice.
And like the point about control is really interesting, isn't it? Like you can imagine commercial leaders be perfectly happy if they're seeing the P&L ticking up as a result of implementing agentic AI. But when it's not, then that desire for control comes back again as well. I'd love to get your take on it, Kat. Like, what's your thoughts on where we're headed with AI and agentic AI particularly?
Well, I mean, I'm super excited because to me, it solved all of my headcount problems more than anything. I see that in the future, marketers will be 360-degree marketers and they will all be team leads. But the team of agents that they manage are just not going to be biological marketing agents anymore. I've been working recently with a platform called NAN, and I mean, we're well into the vibe coding world at this point, right? But and bear in mind, I'm a non-technical stakeholder, okay? I did a humanities degree, and it took me about 90 minutes to build an agent in NAN that I managed to get to send an email. And the interface for me as the marketer was to type in WhatsApp, can you send an email to this CSV list, and sent it a CSV with just my email on. And that was, as I say, around 90 minutes. And that's from the time I opened the platform, found a place to download the structure, put it into the platform, and fannied about trying to work it. The longest bit was actually my connecting my email bit, actually nothing to do with the tool, my own knowledge. So the world is absolutely changing there. Careful stack building is key, right? Like the first thing when you say AI marketing to the head of your data team is you get a very negative response. Can I just plug an LLM into our customer data platform and see what happens? Guess what? No, you can't. So, rolling that out across the business is going to be a bit of a blocker in me more than anything else. But overall, I think AI changes everything because somebody used the phrase air traffic control. And I love that phrase because that's how I picture it in my mind, tiny micro campaigns, customers being assigned, reassigned, moved, exited, inputted into different campaign streams. And as long as we can see the history, I think while it changes how you think about the marketing delivery, then I think it's going to be a very positive change in the long run. The other little bit operational and boring, but I do think it's key, is that one of the major complaints that you hear from marketers is they have to do a lot of grunt work, right? Even when it comes to recruitment, I'm not necessarily able to recruit the most creative marketers that the pool offers me because I won't retain them. I need someone who's a little bit of a coordinator, is organized, is a project manager because of how everything is now. Upload this banner, build this bonus, all these things. If I can get a bonus build agent and a banner uploading agent and a promo page builder agent, suddenly a lot of this grunt work is taken away from my team. And now my recruitment pool opens wide up because I can look for creative, psychological marketers and not just people who I can retain in what is 80% a fairly mundane operational environment.
Totally agree with that. Like a lot of people talk about it, and there's so much noise, right, about kind of AI taking jobs and so on. But I think that like the exciting part of it is how it unleashes that creativity and ability to focus on strategy and not do that kind of operational side of it anymore.
I think you're right, Tom. Just agreeing with Kat's point as well about making the CRM job more interesting. It really does.
Way more interesting.
It's a grind in the betting and gaming industry sometimes because of all of the config to get everything right and all the protections and checks and balances you have to do. So there's a huge benefit to the employee experience and, to Kat's point, the kind of people you can recruit if all of that goes away. And look, we're doing a big platform consolidation at the moment, and one of the big benefits of it is it massively reduces the cycle time to create a campaign. It's not really an AI point, but fundamentally AI will help with that kind of thing, and it just makes it a better job.
Yeah, it makes it a more interesting job, doesn't it? You do the fun stuff rather than the grunt work. And also the whole point about like vibe coding as well is incredible. You know, my son's like 9 and he's built like an app where customers can go on create music, and he did it in about 2 hours. Right, he's 9, you know, so there's so much opportunity, isn't there? Do you want to go, Matt? What's your take on AI and the shifts?
Yeah, I think the point Kat mentioned around it enabling air traffic control, and air traffic control is a term that sort of we've been using for a couple of years, particularly in this current role of how we can get as many messages as we've got to the right customers, but most importantly, safely, which is obviously the job of air traffic control, rather than someone getting 15 emails in 15 minutes about every sport and every gaming and every poker thing that we've got going in the world. So that I think is going to be a huge enabler for us in terms of sort of prioritization of messages, and building on sort of what 4 or 5 years ago we got really excited about data science models that were able to accurately predict different things in terms of cross-sell and other areas. It's another huge step on that sort of journey. I think the point Simon raised around creative is really key. For this to be successful, we don't only need a sort of modeling version of AI that's going to say this is what message a customer should get. We need the creative to also be AI generated creative to enable us to do 300,000-400,000 variants at 3 o'clock on a Saturday. We should be able to do creative for every team in England, Scotland, probably most of Europe, because they're all going to be relevant to at least one customer. So how do we able to get AI to sort of churn that out in a fashion the way we can get the right message out at all times? That's going to be absolutely vital. Although I will echo the concerns of both Simon and Kat around, I've never met a CCO or a commercial director that's going to hand over a free bet budget to a machine. So that'll be a very interesting thing if we look to test it. I imagine we'll be starting at a maximum of 5% of our base are allowed to be put through this model before we ramp it up slowly.
Do you think that's the key then to kind of that control point is just starting slowly, prove the capability, eradicate risk?
Yeah, I think so. I think starting controlled low, definitely not starting during Cheltenham or a World Cup. From our point of view, pick a sort of fairly mundane BAU couple of weeks where we can look to implement for a small number of customers and then scale up. I think there's going to be a learning curve for everyone involved, including the modeling, but also the people using it. And also for our sort of commercial counterparts to make sure that we get trust in the model and we're not, to Simon's point, burning and churning through a lot of customers because it's trying to maximize LTV without a thought for safer gambling or deposit limits or other areas that can slow down a customer and rightly should.
The guardrails will become quite complicated, won't they? Right, around like safer gambling, audience profiles, frequency, and I guess have to start quite strict. But yeah, that's actually kind of relates to another point that I know we've spoken about before, Kat, as well. Is around auditability. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big word, right? Auditability. But for me, it's really important. Like some industries, you just earn trust, right? You earn trust from your customers. You don't have a regulator, and trust is earned. In gambling, trust is audited, right? So if a regulator drops a surprise sort of just investigation on us or is responding to a complaint from a customer and our promo function is black boxed inside an AI that even the developers of the AI tool don't know exactly what's going on in there, my capacity to speak to the regulator is a bit limited. I do think it's not a long-term fear. You know, I think the way that AI is going, because it will become part of everyone's life, I think the trust in AI in the Overton window will grow, right? So which will benefit the industry. But at the beginning, it's going to be a real stop point, to be honest, because it can leave you open. And in the gambling industry, in a regulated market, any grey area is in favour of the customer. So if we have a 3 million bonus dispute and we can't explain to the regulators what's gone on, we're out 3 million. It is that simple. So we do need to be very aware of why the AI is doing things, the frequency with which it's doing things, and how often its tendency to just go off piste is, because if it's too often, we won't be able to use it until we can get it down to really measurable parameters for mainly auditors.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess that's the challenge as well, isn't it? Like there's this like desire for control. There's the need to be audited due to the kind of regulatory nature of the sector. But also, though, that kind of impedes progress as well. Like it kind of makes people go maybe slower than they can. So if you can get around those issues, then you might be able to steal a march on your competitors if you can drive those really personalized, contextually relevant experiences that maximize value. And I guess that will come with the CEO who's prepared to sort of to push the boundaries a little bit, right? So, what's your take on it, Simon, and the barriers to adoption and how you kind of get through those?
Yeah, look, I think we've talked about some of it already. I think what Matt said about slow adoption is exactly the right thing to, the way to think about this. Fundamentally, you can imagine the scenario in this control ridden industry where the CEO comes and says to you, why do I get an email about this football this weekend? I should get an email about the football this weekend. And the answer to that question is because the stats said it would be a bad idea. But that is not a good answer for the CEO's point of view. So I think ultimately, you're never going to be in a world where it's completely driven by a utility function idea, because you'll just have to balance between the two. So it will have broad application and it will drive much better customer experience, but there'll still be the bit around the outside. And the second thing about the barriers to adoption is also to be realistic. Artificial intelligence, well, it still isn't intelligence yet. All right, all of them are trained on historic data. So you're not having historic data, you ain't training them. All right. So every time you go into Cheltenham, you've got no idea what's going on in the marketplace in terms of competitive offers. Sky might do another nuts offer, in which case you go, oh, do we match it or not? Those just aren't, the training data isn't out there for AI to work. The same is true at the start of the football season, where you will just drive reach. All right. That's what you need to do at the start of the season. You need to get your brand out there. So as well as a slow rollout, and well as making sure you are, protecting some of the metrics around reach, which might be less clear to do, we just need to accept that it's generally applicable, but not always applicable. And you'll still have your teams doing the big broad campaigns, or you've got a brand new game to launch or whatever. And AI has nothing to say about that. And that's where the marketeers coming with a nice blend, hopefully, of art and science.
Yeah. So the future is one where there's still the big campaigns that the marketers have to run because they're so important for the business, but also so generalistic and have such broad appeal. And then there's the role of driving the guardrails around how agentic AI operates in specific contexts and continuously monitoring that and driving a phased rollout.
Just one more that I think is really important, Tom, is that, and I've noticed this from working in several different organizations within gaming of different sizes, is that agentic AI most often is a component, right? It's a part of a system. Multiple agents work together to take you down your system process to the end of the line and whatever your output is. And what I've noticed in marketing teams in gambling, we actually aren't very good at those systems with humans. We've recruited smart people, adaptable people, and a lot of stuff is ad hoc, right? The plan is on an Excel this week and it's in Monday.com the week after, and then it's on Word the week after. We are working on the fly, coming up with an idea and launching it, which is great. However, it's not replicable. We can't put agents as components in a system if we don't know the system. So I think that is a blocker too. If you can't draw your marketing delivery flow out on a piece of paper with a pen, you're not ready to build agentic AI components.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Look, super interesting conversations, guys. We've come towards the end of the chat, but like really, really interesting conversations around AI, around onboarding, around personalization, around customer motivation. The piece around safer gambling is critical as well, and super interesting and a unique challenge, I think. I've got an emerging tradition. This is only episode 3 of this podcast, but what I'd love to the audience with is your top tips for retention. So maybe we start with you, Matt. What's your number one tip for retention in betting and gaming?
For me, it's focus on the right customers. Stay out of the way of the ones that are doing what you want them to do, and make sure your retention focus is around customers that you do want to retain, and make sure you've got the right thing to be able to show how to retain those.
Perfect. Right customers. Yeah, perfect. Simon, what's yours?
Mine's a bit of a dry one, to be honest. It's that my background before this was mobile telcos. And mobile telcos had a very similar commercial dynamic, albeit a subscription business, of sign people up and then retain them. And we always had a cost to acquire and we always had a cost to retain. And I've not seen many people in the gambling industry actually have a cost to retain. The other thing that's important is, number one, it focuses the mind that if you have a cost to retain, then you should be able to demonstrate a return on that cost. So it will drive the right disciplines in your team. But the second is, I think it would start to make the gaming industry recognise that they aren't new customers; they're just re-signing up. So it's as good to pump marketing money into keeping those people going as it is to let them go and re-sign them up later in 2 years' time or whatever. So I know it's an esoteric one and a bit dry, but have a cost to retain and manage it with a return on ad spend, and I think businesses will do well.
Well, I think that's spot on actually, because you always see like CPAs in gaming like 150 quid, but then like the retention budget's tiny in comparison. It just makes no sense in a market which is just like
Especially
saturated.
when a CPA is a punt because you don't actually know what you're getting, and a CPR is not a punt because you should be able to recognise those guys that are going. But
Exactly right. Exactly right. Like a budget per customer. Yeah. What's your take, Kat? What's your number one top tip?
My top tip, I mean, it's be clear on your commercial strategy. I mean, be really, really clear on your top line commercial strategy and the ways that it potentially connects to the motivations of the customer that are in your database. And if they are not aligned, you need to change your database or your strategy.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, guys, for joining. It's been a brilliant conversation. There was so many great takeouts, I think, for people that are in the retention space in this industry, but also beyond the industry. So thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and time.